All right, so the topic of racism is being discussed throughout our state, the U.S., and even the United States Congress. It is a problem, obviously, that needs to be addressed.
We can and must do better for those suffocating on our city streets, whether under the knee of a racist cop or from a system of justice that has perpetuated inequality and injustice. And we must do so with a sense of urgency because Black lives matter. It shouldn't be difficult for white Americans to say so, such a fundamental truth. Black lives matter, period.
Congressman Adam Schiff is just one of many trying to address the systemic problem, but what can Congress actually do to help? Well, Congressman Schiff is here now to discuss, and Congressman Schiff, thank you so much for being here with us. Really appreciate it.
It's good to be with you. Thank you for having me.
So I saw your video. It was very passionate. It was very persuasive. These are problems that the African-American community and other communities of color have complained about for decades. You, in fact, worked as a prosecutor for years, prosecuting misconduct, among other things, with police officers. Why the video now? Why now?
Well, I think that the graphic and brutal murder of George Floyd really has compelled a national movement. And you're absolutely right. This should have been compelled long before now. George Floyd's murder follows on a whole series of other brutal killings of people of color, but predominantly Black men and boys at the hands of police officers. And so this change, this reform movement is long overdue. We need to make sure, though, that this time is successful. And I think we have now one of the most comprehensive police reform bills that have ever been introduced in Congress, conceptualized by the Congressional Black Caucus. It does things like eliminate the qualified immunity that police officers or departments have that have shielded bad cops. It prohibits those departments that want to receive federal funding, which is many of them, from employing tactics like carotid holds or chokeholds. It strengthens the Civil Rights Division of the Justice Department to be able to prosecute cases involving police misconduct. It ends racial profiling and a whole host of other really important challenges. But you're absolutely right. This moment was too long in coming, but we need to make sure that it leads to real reform, and not just of the criminal justice system, but of inequities across a whole host of other areas as well.
Well, and Congressman Schiff, you have to be aware that there are a lot of skeptics out there, particularly when it comes to this legislation. There's reason to believe that this legislation will make it through the House, but what happens when it gets over to the Senate?
Well, it will be a struggle in the Senate, and this is why I think it's going to be necessary for people to continue to take to the streets and demonstrate and make sure.
You know, the Republicans are working on their own police reform bill. Do you know anything about it and what it might entail and whether it will actually have anything whatsoever to include a lot of the elements that are in the legislation that's coming from the House?
Yes. And as I say, it's got to go beyond this reform legislation in the House. It's got to go beyond the criminal justice system. It's got to include reforms, for example, to end unequal access to health care, where racism also accounts for hugely disproportionate death rates among Black Americans from the virus.
Congressman Schiff, the fact of the matter is law enforcement is largely a local thing. It's local jurisdiction. So this legislation at the federal level, how are you going to be able to guarantee that, in fact, local police departments are going to follow it, assuming that this legislation actually passes? How are you going to ensure that local police departments actually follow the new laws?
Well, it's a good question, and it certainly is true that the federal government won't be able to do this alone. Now, we can provide some very powerful incentives. A lot of departments are reliant on federal funding. But more than that, we can empower the Civil Rights Division as we had to create mechanism, for example, enforcement under the Fair Housing Act and other legislation that give the federal government powers to step in causes of action when civil rights are violated. So there's a lot that we can do, but you're absolutely right. There's going to have to be a lot, perhaps even more at the local level, at the level of the city councils, at the level of local police commissions. And one of the things that we hope to establish in this legislation is powerful police commissions around the country, independent bodies that can evaluate police misconduct, that can prosecute, or that can stand up units in district attorney's office to prosecute police misconduct cases. But a lot of that hard work will have to be done at the local level.
We haven't seen this type of activism since the 1960s. Do you think this time is really, really different?
I think so. I hope and pray that it's different, but I can understand the skepticism. We've had movements across the country to deal with gun violence, for example, after numerous gun tragedies, and only seen those efforts thwarted by a powerful gun lobby. We'll be up against a lot in trying to achieve this kind of massive reform of our criminal justice system. But I have to say, I think that the pandemic is really bringing home these inequalities and inequities and injustices, and I think creating powerful momentum for change. And we just have to fight to make sure that we get it done, as we have come back from other cataclysms in our history and built the country back better, we need to make sure that we build the country better now, more just, more equitable, and we attack this persistent problem of racism.
All right, Congressman Schiff, thank you so much for joining us and for sharing your point of view. Really appreciate it, and stay safe, sir.
Thank you.